We're all sick, tired, and wasted. We're all sick, tired, and wasted. You're not the only one. Welcome to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Lee Camp. One thing that's being lost in this endless coverage of the presidential horse race is the fact that enormous wealth is still being extracted every minute of every day from our system. It's being sucked into the mouths of Wall Street titans and transnational corporations while billions of people around the world suffer. So I figured it was time to talk to an economist and figure this out. One of the awesome ones. Don't worry, he's not boring. He's taught at Amherst, NYU, and Yale, among other places, and he's the author of Capitalism Hits the Fan, the Global Economic Meltdown, and What You Can Do About It. Richard Wolff, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Lee. Glad to be here.
Capitalism Hits the Fan, the Global Economic Meltdown. Why did you go with such a rosy, turn that frown upside down title?
Well, because I'm tired, as I think most Americans are these days, and indeed people around the world, with the endless cheerleading for an economic system that for most people isn't working very well anymore. And nothing illustrates it more than the inequality of wealth and income that this system not only has produced, but keeps producing, as you quite rightly say. And so I'm simply reacting to a system that isn't working by saying, hey, it isn't working.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I've been watching these speeches by Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, the two candidates we're told we're allowed to vote for. And I have learned that they will bring tons of jobs to the U.S. That's what they tell us. Tons of jobs, tons of money right here to America. And everybody will be rich and fat and happy. So why are you against everyone being happy?
Yeah, it's a sad story about myself. Actually, I would like people to be happy. And my idea about happiness is to face the reality that we really could do better than the capitalism we have, and we should have been discussing that for the last 40 years as things kept going downhill, but we haven't, so I'm a little pressured up to get that conversation to happen now. Let me give you an example.
Please.
The agency around the world that does the best job statistically of measuring inequality is an old established British outfit called Oxfam. Every year they issue a report on inequality, and in February of this year they issued the one for 2016. And here's the key takeaway statistic. The 62 richest people in the world today, the 62 richest individuals, most of whom are Americans, not all but most, they together have more wealth than the bottom half of the population of this planet, roughly 3.5 billion people. Now, I don't know of any religion, any ethics, any morality that could possibly justify what I just said.
Yeah.
And it's been building for 40 years, and we have it all around us. And so for me to say this is a system that isn't working for most people should be something everybody understands, like they do the fact that the sun comes up in the morning.
Yeah, and the UN has estimated that it would take roughly $30 billion to end world hunger for each year, and the Koch brothers alone have around $80 to $100 billion. So we now, technologically speaking, we now have the ability to feed, clothe, and house everybody on the planet if we wanted to, and it wouldn't even cost really that much in the scope of things. So why are we not doing that?
Well, because the folks who have it, the folks who have been allowed by the rest of us to accumulate this crazy over-excess of wealth don't want to give it up. They've gotten used to it. For 30 or 40 years, they could get more and more, while the rest of the population couldn't, while we have a new generation of young people who can't get a bachelor's degree from college without running up tens of thousands of dollars of debt. I mean, it's everywhere, but they think they're on some kind of special road where they can just get more and more, and the rest of us stand there looking at them as if we're frozen and incapable of doing anything about it.
Yeah, I want to switch for a second to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is finally getting some coverage in the media despite 4 years of just about silence. It's quite likely that either Trump or Clinton, despite little things they've said here and there, would pass it or not repeal it if it's already law when they get in. It basically cedes our power as a country to corporations, but it's sold as a job creator, tons of good paying jobs. So what are you going to do with the 3 or 4 jobs that you're able to collect with the TPP? Are you a fan?
Not at all. For me, the TPP is just another milestone along the way of reorganizing the world to maximize the profits of the big corporations who pull the strings, to make them yet more wealthy than they've been before, to get out of the way the various governments and local groups that might sometimes produce an obstacle or two. And you're quite right. Mrs. Clinton used to be a big fan of it. Now she says she has second thoughts. That might have something to do with running for office in a country that's very suspicious of all of these things. Mr. Trump, well, we don't know one day to the next what exactly he will do. My guess is that, as has happened in the past, as happened with NAFTA when Bill Clinton put it into the law, that after a little bit of hemming and hawing, there'll be some clever excuse why this too has to be done, and we will be promised jobs that never appear, that have nothing to do with anything. The biggest outcome of NAFTA was to produce such chaos in the country of Mexico that millions came to the United States looking for work, and other millions fell into a situation of police violence and drug wars that we've been reading about ever since. To imagine that the TPP is going to have a different history, even though it's modeled on the same plan, is, I think, the kind of craziness that passes for conventional wisdom in the United States these days.
Yeah, it does seem like it's pretty much designed to just continue the corporate stranglehold, continue to lock down the threat of democracy that democracy poses to corporations and their profit. TPP has a lot to do with the economies of various countries. Something else that we seem to constantly be worried about in terms of our economy is the GDP. And in China, I've seen reports they build entire ghost cities where people aren't living there, but they just build them because GDP partially measures productivity. So if you're building cities, then it's good for GDP. So they have entirely empty cities. Why don't we have our ghost cities? I mean, shouldn't we be competing and building our own ghost cities? And what does that say about GDP?
Well, I think what it tells you is that economies are driven by the urgent needs they have at any moment. They tell you all kinds of stories about meeting the needs of the people with the economic system they have, but most of the time that isn't true. For example, in China, they have a fundamental problem. In unbelievably short time historically, really 30, 40 years, they have moved hundreds of millions of people off of the countryside into the cities where they need industrial jobs. If they don't keep those people working and producing, they will have a revolution on their hands, and they know it. So if they can't produce for what people need, they will produce ghost cities for what a future generation may need, because that's what they have to kind of keep going. Here in the United States, the same example, slightly changed. We have had in the last 5 or 10 years something like 6 million people leave the labor force, quit looking for work. This is a catastrophe in terms of the ability of the economy to move forward. But instead, by saying they're not in the labor force, we can claim that the unemployed, who are just the people that are continuing to look for a job, not those that stopped, that the unemployment rate has come down, and we pat ourselves on the head. We should be screaming in agony at the absurdity of more and more people living off the labor of fewer and fewer people, which is an economic problem, not a success.
So what's the answer here? Is it simply that capitalism is the idea of infinite growth on a planet of finite resources, so therefore it will inevitably end with us eating ourselves alive? And you know, is that correct? And where do we head from here? You've pointed out many of the problems. Where do we go?
I think we have to face the fact that something nearly a religion in the world of capitalism has to be abandoned. And it's basically this idea that letting each corporation be run by a small number of people, major shareholders, boards of directors, whose number one goal, whose bottom line objective is profit, make profit, make profit, leads to decisions that reduce the environment to chaos, that destroy millions of people's lives, that periodically explode, like in the 1930s and again in 2008. We've got to realize this is no way to organize business. We should be organizing our businesses to do what we need as a people, cooperatively, to decide what the work is that needs to be done, what the goods and services are, how we are respectful for our environment, and make the decisions on that basis, not on the old and now discredited notion that if everybody seeks their maximum profit by some magic, it'll all work out real well for the rest of us. It isn't true, and we can't tolerate it anymore as a species.
Right, and to that point, you talked a lot about, in your books, you talk a lot about democracy in the workplace, democratizing the workplace, but so that would mean workers, you know, and you say like workers wouldn't vote to send their jobs to China, so you'd have a completely different system. You get largely what the workers wanted, but people always say, yeah, but workers we're not good about thinking with our brain balls, right? We're not very bright, we're very dumb, and so therefore we need a corporate elite to tell us what to do because they're very smart.
Well, you know, let me be personal with you for a minute. I went to the elite schools of the United States. I went to Harvard as an undergraduate. I got a master's degree at Stanford, and I have a PhD in economics from Yale University. I'm like a poster boy for American elite education. I spent 10 years of my life there. Let me assure you of two things. One, those folks in those places are no smarter than anybody else. They come from the right families, they make the right connections, and they end up at the top. But they learn along the way what they're supposed to do, and they do it. And the end result is the mess we're in, leaving them in charge. When they tell us how smart they are, but looking around at the disaster we are all living through should cure you of any tendency to believe the self-aggrandizing nonsense that comes from those institutions.
So I'll mark you down as not for sociopaths running the economy. I don't really understand why, but that's what you apparently stand for. We have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to throw some little ideas by and see what your opinion of them are. Are you for basic income? Is that a good idea? The idea that people get a certain amount of money every month just for being in this country, and supposedly most of it would be paid for simply by the things it would get rid of, like Social Security. And I also wonder whether you're for a charter system for corporations, which apparently we had 100 years ago, where a area, locality could take away a corporate charter if it's not treating the people right.
I like that second idea a lot better than the first one. To make the business enterprise responsible to the workers who depend on it, to the community that depends on it, that's the way to go. To bring democracy to the workplace. You know, we live in a country which says it believes in democracy. It fights wars around the world telling us it's in order to bring them democracy. And yet when we go to work in a place that is the opposite of democracy. A tiny number of people, board of directors, big shareholders, tell us all what to do. Close the factory when they think of it. Use terrible technology that hurts our ears and our breath and our bodies. They make all the decisions. We live with the results, but we don't participate in the decisions. We made a revolution back in the 18th century because we didn't like King George in England doing that. Why in the world do we accept the tiny number of people doing it now? So yes, I'm in favor of bringing democracy to the workplace where it should have been from the beginning anyway. As to the guaranteed income, here's the problem. I would like it if it went together with guaranteed work. If we don't need more than a certain amount of work to be done in our society, we have an irrational way now of dealing with it. Some people work Indeed, they do overtime. And other people are left on the wayside with nothing. That's crazy. If we have more people than we have work, then let everybody have a shorter work week. Let's share the work.
Absolutely.
If we have some people working and other people living on a guaranteed income, the tension between those two, the feeling that those who do the work are somehow carrying the others, will lead us to the same kind of bitter hostility with one another that we have now. Let's not do that. Let's give everybody useful work, give them a proper income, and it'll overcome many of the absurd, self-destructive problems capitalism has bequeathed to us, and that we now have to say, hopefully, goodbye to.
I like that. Great points all around. If we don't need to do that much work, then let's spread the income as opposed to it all going to the top 0.1%. Richard Wolff, it's been a pleasure to have you. You were also midway through this interview attacked by a giant wasp on that camera, but you dealt with it like a champ. So thank you so much for being here.